Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm Rachel Astarte. Today on the show, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Shelley Buck and Kathy Curtis. They are the authors of Leave Your Light On, the magical mantra left behind by an illuminating spirit, which is based on Shelley's son, Ryder. We're going to hear more about all of that in a moment, but just a little bit about each of these wonderful women. Shelley is a storyteller and an artist, and she has been expressing her creativity through original jewelry at Shelley Designs. And again, we're going to hear much more about her journey. And Kathy has been a healing artist and a writer since 1991. She particularly works with the transformation of grief and illness and emotional barriers through creative expression. She's also the author of Invisible Ink, which is a memoir about her own journey through grief. Ladies, thank you so much for being on Self Talk.
Thank you very much for having us.
Now, I know that you both are friends, and that's part of this story. But Shelley, I would love for you to start off and tell us a little bit about your journey and your son.
All right. Well, Ryder was born in 1990, an old soul, very mature for his young age. He was always kind of introspective and self-contained. I should back up a second. I met my husband at Disney Studios, and we started a family right after we were married. Ryder, my first son of three, grew up, pretty mellow, and I was more of an excitable type. So we had to learn to do a dance that left room for both of us. Mostly I had to learn because he was chill from the get-go. Mm-hmm. And I had to just reel it back in. When Ryder was 22, he had already started a band. He was a guitar player, singer, songwriter. And he was diagnosed with testicular cancer, stage 4. Mm. So at the time, I didn't know what stage 4 meant, but we found out quickly it had spread to his lungs, and he went immediately into surgery and then treatment. We went through 9 months of that, with 1 week in the hospital where I was with him every day and 2 weeks out. Mm. So during his out time, he would recover for a couple of days, and then he was gone. Mm-hmm. And this is part of what I had to learn as a mom, to loosen the leash. I mean, he was 22 after all. And right. Though I worried and wanted to see where he was at all times, he was out playing gigs, camping, hiking, surfing, climbing rocks, doing all sorts of things that, the doctors would recommend against. Then he went to Bali for a month, the summer that he was cleared, and came back a different person. I mean, if he had been introspective and spiritual before, he was 10 times that when he got back. Wow. He'd studied the culture and the belief systems and really brought a lot of it home with him. A couple of months after that, his car broke down on the freeway, and he was walking home in a dense fog in the middle of the night and was hit by 2 cars. And that was the beginning of my grief journey.
Yeah.
So that's been almost 8 years now. And I was writing a journal from the day he was diagnosed and well beyond his passing. And at a certain point, several people had said, you have to write a book. And then Ryder got in touch with me and said, Mom, tell my story. So I turned to Kathy, and she can tell that part of the story because it's pretty good.
There's a lot to go into there, but yeah, Kathy, so how do you fall into this storyline, and tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Well, Shelley and I met when we were 12 years old, and my family moved into her neighborhood in Chicago, and we just hit it off immediately, just, bonded deeply and permanently. And so she went to California and followed her dreams of working at Disney and met Chris and had her family. And I got a fine art degree, went into corporate communications and marketing and storytelling, and all the ways that you can use creative abilities in the corporate world. And but at the same time, I always had a real pull toward journaling and self-expression and just the ways in which creativity can be a healing tool. That was just my thing. It came from wherever. I mean, it wasn't anything I studied. It was just something that had worked for me in my life.
Yeah.
So I began pursuing that and working with every imaginable kind of group, from women that had been through domestic violence to people that were going through health issues, heart, cancer, AIDS.
Mm.
I mean, it was just amazing. There was never a door that didn't open for me, and there was never a group that didn't just completely fall under the spell of their own need to do that.
Mm.
So around that time, when I had been working with all these different groups, my mother died, and it was devastating. And I had more grief and more emotional trauma than I knew what to do with.
Mm.
So I began writing, and it was the writing journey with that really awakened me to more of a spiritual level of my being.
Mm.
And it took me into the mystery of, life after life,
Mm.
what happens when we die. And
Yeah.
so by the time Ryder passed, I had written my own book. I had been doing this work with people for a long time. I had been talking with Shelley, regularly through her journey of grief, but people were telling her, you need to write a book, and um, kind of a movie producer had said, I really like this story. I think you need to turn it from a journal into a narrative. So you need to find a ghostwriter. And Shelley called me and was just hysterical, like freaking out. I have no idea where to go to find somebody that can help me write this book. Oh my gosh. I mean, where do I have to go? New York City. Oh my gosh. And,
Yeah.
I'm sitting on the phone thinking, hello.
I was just gonna say, like, really though?
Right. Conk. Wake up.
Love it.
Anyway, that's our moment that we look back on. It was a lot of humor, but it was the birth of another new level of our journey together as friends. And to be friends with somebody who, through the years, I mean, if I would think of her, my phone would ring and she'd be on the other end of it. I mean, that's the kind of friendship we've had. Not that we talked all the time, but we were always connected.
Yeah.
Where we went from that to daily talking, and it's going on like 5 years now, that we are on the phone all the time and talking about really profound things. And so anyway, our friendship is just magnified. And so I feel like it put the friendship in the perspective that it was destined, that I go off and do all the work I did,
Yeah.
Shelley go off and do what she did, and that there would come a point in time where I had a role to play in her life that was more than I could have ever imagined. So
Yeah, that's
yeah.
amazing. What was it like to collaborate on such a personal and deeply spiritual book?
I couldn't have asked for a better person to hold me up, guide me, just be there on a deep, understanding, intuitive level. I never could have found anybody better than Kathy.
Mm, that's beautiful. How about you?
And that's, again, I mean, I feel that it was destiny and that there couldn't have been anyone better prepared for it. What I'll tell you is that it was a journey, it was a creative journey unlike any I've ever done. And
Mm,
I've collaborated with a lot of people. But, what Shelley had to do was like another layer of her grief is that in the writing of a book that would serve the reader and give them a story that could keep them on the edge of their seat, but also help to, I don't know, help to heal them in a way. We
mm,
had to leave things out of the story that Shelley had put in the journal. And there were many times when it was another like wave of grief that she had to go through to let go of things that her best friend, is saying, you really have to let go of this. So
mm.
it was quite a journey, but I came out of it. I always felt Shelley had a ton of courage, and I'll reiterate that forever because she faced and tackled and stood up to and overcame in order to tell the story.
Yeah. And losing a family member is one of the worst possible things that can happen to us, whether it's a mother or a child or a father. I lost my father, this is 20 years ago, and it still feels like yesterday. And we were very close, and he was also a writer. And it's devastating. Your life just is never the same. Um, but if you both could speak briefly, and I know this is a huge topic, but how does, let me back it up. Ram Dass talks about productive grief versus unproductive grief. And I wonder if you might be able to speak to that a bit, what that means to you.
Well, the unproductive grief is what I was in the very beginning. It froze me in my tracks. I could barely take a step forward. I could barely shower. And that lasted, well, the showers didn't last, but that kind of debilitating grief lasted for at least a couple of years, where I just had no desire to do anything. And I had two other children.
Yeah.
So I was putting one foot in front of the other, doing what had to be done, dealing with life. I mean, 1 month after Ryder passed, my husband's film was released, Frozen.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a litany of celebrations and travel. And I had to compartmentalize my brain and my feelings so that I could attend to him and his success, and also my own grief journey.
Wow.
I took a lesson from Ryder ultimately, and sought the things that did fulfill me and did light me up, because that was what he was all about when he was in the hospital and all of those antics. He was pursuing his greater good, his best inner light. And that was definitely part of his healing. So I took a lesson from that and tried to apply it to my life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to talk more about that in a minute, but Kathy, I'd love to hear your thoughts about productive versus unproductive grief.
Well, I learned a lot through my own journey, and that was, when I had all these feelings of grief about my mom, I knew that I had to write. I mean, I knew that I just had to get, because her death was, it happened quickly. It was very painful. My family had no idea how to handle any of it because it was over 25 years ago, and it was early in the days of dealing with cancer and it was just very overwhelming.
Yeah.
So the writing really, really, well, that was my productive grief time. That was me doing something with my grief.
Mm-hmm.
But then the thing that came out of it was, just sort of this opening that happened to my mom's spirit, where I began to feel, because I wrote to her, I didn't just write about her, I wrote to her, the being led, being intuitively guided through your own grief is the most productive grief I can, talk about. And I lead people through that kind of a program. But I think what Shelley's talking about is the same thing. It's engaging with the lessons and, acknowledging the meaning within the bubble of your particular experience. So I know that there are people who feel they can't get up and do anything when they're going through grief. If they can do something simple, go for a walk in the woods and think about their loved one, or go, plant flowers, or just a little tiny actions done on behalf of that loved one. There's a lot of healing that can happen in that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I mean, and also what I'm feeling as you're saying that is you're keeping their spirit with you.
Yes.
And you're honoring that being, that very unique being, by engaging and not just staying stuck in the sad place, which may never go away ultimately, right? But you're not living there. You're, it's almost like you're taking the grieving part. There's this idea of people who are grieving are so pure, there's nothing else but that pain that's moving through them. There's no distraction, there's no lying, there's no, it's completely an honest way of being. And so to take that purity and work with the spirit of your loved one, what a beautiful way to honor them.
Yes.
And in a way, I mean, I'm putting this together. Maybe you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong, but in a way, it sounds like that's what this book was in part as well.
I would say that's true.
Yeah, the book is one of the things we did, and like Kathy said, it's not necessary to write a book, but the act of writing is so cathartic and therapeutic. I'm a person of action. So even in this debilitating grief, we set up a music scholarship at the high school in Ryder's name.
Beautiful.
We installed a bench on the top of his favorite mountain, where he used to go and play his guitar. Excuse me. And we produced 3 CDs of his music, because we had some recorded and some we recorded with his brothers, who were trained vocalists singing the lead parts. And what else did we do, Kath?
Well, I mean, I think your life revolved around bringing, honoring him for a long, long time. And there were so many ways to do it, because he had honored his own life in so many different ways. And it just gave you a ton to work with. But I do think that you're right, Rachel, that the writing of the book, and especially doing that together, because I think the journey through grief often feels very lonely, and there aren't a lot of people that are comfortable stepping up to taking that journey with someone. I've done that with many, many people, but there's nobody I would do it more for than my best friend. And, this is just an act of, I don't know, just pure friendship. And love.
I can really see the web, when you back up and look at the two of you becoming besties at 12, and then just going through, and yet doing your own lives, right, separately, and somehow never losing that connection. And what an amazing support that was for both of you. I'm assuming, Shelley, you were there for Kathy when her mother died. And
it was very quick, and I was across the country. But I do remember the event. I don't remember a lot of it, Kath.
Well, it was a blur. It was a very I mean, she had, small children, and I had a husband and a full-time job, and my mother lived 2 hours away, and it was just insane how
Mm,
that felt. And it was about 2.5 months from beginning to, her death. And
yeah.
um, but yes, I mean, Shelley's the one I go to no matter what I'm going through. If I need to talk about it and just have someone listen to me,
Yeah.
she's the one.
Well,
Yeah.
that actually leads me to my next question. And then I really would love to get into a little bit more of Ryder's legacy but what can we do when we encounter someone who is grieving? What's the best thing we can? I mean, obviously we can't take it away. We
Yeah,
can't say things will get better. Of course they will, but that's not what you want to hear at the time
right,
at all. Because it certainly doesn't feel that way.
right.
What are some pieces of advice you might give to listeners about managing a dear friend or even a family member or even a stranger who's grieving?
The most important thing anyone did for me was to just be there. They
Mm,
didn't have to say anything profound. They listened and told stories about Ryder, which I could hear and tell endlessly to this day.
mm,
Um, and I think, one friend asked me to go for a walk. Okay, I can do that. That can be quiet, that can be meditative. I can be in touch with Ryder. But it was company, and it was just that kind of almost passive
mm,
company that was such a great comfort.
mm. Beautiful. Yeah, Kathy, what would you suggest?
Well, a big part of why I think the writing program I take people through has worked so well is that it really is based on asking questions of the person going through grief that maybe nobody ever asked them before.
Mm,
Like, um, how did you meet your loved one? Or what's your favorite memory
mm,
of your child? Or what is a dream that you think they had that maybe they didn't get to fulfill? Like, just get them into a bigger way of engaging with that loved one and show that you're as curious and interested in them as they are.
yeah.
That's like getting to talk about your loved one
Mm,
is medicine when
yeah.
you're
Mhm.
going through grief. So, but I found that it's just like coming at it from a different, like just come up with a different kind of question born out of your own curiosity
Mm-hmm.
that just makes them think about their loved one, not from a point of view of grief, but wow, well, this is the person that I loved. And,
Mm-hmm.
this is something I hadn't thought about. It just like brings their spirit up.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's funny as you say that, I'm wondering if sometimes if there might be a best time to raise those questions, because I'm thinking of my own experience. Sometimes those questions would make me grieve even more, to have to think about this person almost as though they're still alive,
Mm.
and say, oh, and God forbid, whatever family member it is. In my case with my father, was there something that he didn't get to do would break my heart. You know what I mean? To think
Mhm.
about that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that everybody's different, of course, but
Definitely. And I think you're right that there's, timing. We can never know what's going to be right for someone. But I'll tell you, I come at it from the point of view that they are still alive in some way,
okay.
whether it's spiritually, whether it's the the unfolding story of that person, your father, in your heart. Like
Mhm.
there's some version of they're still there that you never
Mhm.
have to let go of.
Right.
And I
Yes.
think I really feel like we have been um, hurt by the idea that we had to just grieve and move on,
Mhm.
because it doesn't work like that. But when we can move on in a more uplifting way, like I think when we're in grief, we are down deep in the heavy, heavy energy that we walk through life with.
Mhm.
When we are communicating and experiencing the spirit of our loved one, we raise up out of that. And
Mhm.
so um, there's a healing effect of being able to pull up and pull up and
Yeah.
pull up, and to the point where we almost shift how we see life and death.
Yeah.
So that's been my take on it, and I think not everybody is comfortable with that, but I certainly am.
That's beautiful. I really, and again, it speaks to what we were saying earlier about honoring the spirit, the energy of that being who was so important in your life. So if it's not too intimate a question, Shelley, how are some of the ways that you have heard from or talked to or communicated with Ryder?
Well, Ryder is with me all the time now, but I started with psychics, astrologers who, would get communications from Ryder. I had a friend who received messages from him like a fax in the middle of the night, and she would get up and transcribe it while she could still see it and send it to me the next day. These were miraculous, and they kept me going. I lived for it, and ultimately I learned that Ryder is right here beside me, and all I need to do is really think about him, talk to him, write to him. Thanks to Kathy, I did that a few times, and then the things we did to keep his legacy going have been immeasurably helpful.
Yeah, beautiful. And he was in favor of you writing the book, I understand.
Yes, well, that was his idea, so
Fantastic.
it was the straw that tipped it.
Yeah. So what do you hope people will get out of this collaboration between the two of you? What is the main message of this book?
Well, it's based on hopefulness, and that there is a positive way to move through the most difficult times. And I won't say arrive, because it's a passage, and I don't know if there's an arrival point. I don't believe it ends, as you said. Grief just transforms.
Right.
It transforms us into different people, perhaps more compassionate people. But the story of Ryder's tenacity and his uplifting introspection and philosophies are all there in the book, and the way he affected people. There are myriad stories of his friends that were touched by him and transformed by him. And it was all about the way he approached his life, his light, and spreading that love in the world.
Wow, beautiful. Yeah. Kathy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. Well, I could talk forever about Ryder Buck. I mean, to live with your light on, what he shows you is that having your light on doesn't mean you're this like Buddha-like spiritual, guru. It means you're being fully who you are, everything you are and nothing more. And he did that openly.
That's very Taoist.
He was you knew he lived his life because he lived it out loud. But so that's what lit him up. That's how he had to be in the world in order to feel alive, in order to beat the cancer, in order to everything he wanted to do. He had to live like that. So I knew Shelley. Shelley was very much like that. And when Ryder died, her light, man, it went dark.
Yeah.
It was scary. it was hard to watch that, to go through it, to hear her talk about not wanting to live a life that was so dark, that looked like every day was just going to be more darkness. But, writing the book and focusing on what Ryder was all about, I remember the day her light came back on, or that I noticed that it was on and that it didn't go back out.
Yeah.
And it was, a couple of years ago, and we were on the phone, but I felt it. It's like, oh my gosh, Shelley's light is back. So, I think that's a pretty amazing thing that came out of this journey through the book.
Yeah, the process of doing that honoring and that deep connection work. Yeah, that's beautiful. Wow. Okay, so how can people? I'm sure they're clamoring at this point. How do my listeners find your book?
They can go to leaveyourlightonbook.com, and there are links there to order. They can go directly to Amazon under Leave Your Light On. Both of those ways will take you to the book. Okay,
great. Right. So I just wanted, the title of the book again is Leave Your Light On, the musical mantra left behind by an illuminating spirit. And the authors are Kathy Curtis and Shelley Buck. Thank you both so much for being on Self Talk. This was an amazing, and I think a really important conversation to have.
Yeah. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.